Okay, so hello everybody. This lecture is just to recap over the Harvard referencing skills that we've been discussing over the last few weeks since the beginning of term. So I know a few of you have had a few questions about this, so I thought I'd put together a bit of a video so that you guys can refer back to it in your own time. And of course, we can obviously discuss any specific questions you've got in the remaining sessions, just to make sure that you're completely comfortable with it. So, referencing is obviously really important. It's sometimes known as a referencing list, or you'll hear us refer to things like your bibliography or your short referencing, both of which I'm going to go through in this video. So, it's basically a list of all the books and the journals and the web pages that you use to help you complete your assignments or any work that you have been asked to do. It's kept at the end of your assignment, so that's normally where you would find somebody's bibliography. And there are several systems for referencing, and at Ravensbourne we will ask you to be doing the Harvard system. So there are different systems, there are obviously American versions, there are different versions of Harvard as well. So as long as you're making sure that you're following the Ravensbourne system, then you will be absolutely fine, okay? And that's what this presentation is going to be discussing. So it's really important to make sure that you're referencing correctly. And here are just some of the main reasons that we ask you to do it. So obviously it's really important that you give credit to the person that wrote the book or the article or the web page that you might then be referring to in your work. And really, it's just so that you can't pass work off as your own if it isn't your own. Anyone that reads your assignment must be able to retrace your steps and locate the information that you've used. And it's a critical part of development in higher education. So it's something that we will ask you to do for every single project whilst you're on the course. And it is something that you might be asked to do at a later stage. So it's really just making sure that you nail these skills now, become really comfortable so that it becomes a sort of second nature for you as you progress through your studies and later career. Really important. If you don't reference your work to the standard required, you're likely to fail the unit overall. So it's something that's taken really seriously at Ravensbourne. It's not something that should just be seen as a sort of add-on or an addition to your work. It's something that really needs to be considered throughout, and obviously hopefully not left till the last minute. So that's something that we will be discussing in a moment, making sure that you keep a list of your references as you go to make that process of collating that final bibliography and referencing list as smooth as possible. And it is something that Ravensbourne, if you plagiarised your work, for example, then you are likely to fail the unit overall, which then leads you into a situation where you might be looking at discussing retrieving work or retaking units, which obviously we don't want anybody to have to be in that situation. So it's really important that if you do have questions about referencing, that you do speak to one of your tutors about it, just to make sure that you are completely happy with what is expected of you. So plagiarism, there's a definition at the top here. So plagiarism is the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and trying to pass them off as your own. So it's obviously highly frowned upon. It's not something that you guys should even be considering, obviously, at this stage. But it is something that if you don't reference correctly, you can sometimes find yourself in a situation where you may be unknowingly plagiarising somebody else's work. So that's why it's so important to keep a really rigid list of all of your sources. So obviously that involves copying and pasting, so copying word for word from a source and not crediting the author, not using the correct quotation marks if you're putting any direct quotes into your work, and referencing incorrectly or not at all. So you must reference, we've put on here, which is actually really important, that you must reference your own research too. So say, for example, you did some primary research or you took some street style photographs for part of your project. It is really important to reference those as your own images as well. So to give yourself credit, if you like, for anything that you have done for yourself. And we will look at how you can do that in a moment too. So I've put together a couple of slides just for some examples, just to show you how easy it is to incorrectly or to accidentally not reference correctly. So this is an image of somebody's work in the background here, and it says, potentially that you might write something like this in your work, or if you were writing a blog post or something perhaps. So working on a new print for my trend forecasting unit. That might be something that you wrote in maybe a journal or something that you were keeping a record of with the image behind. Or this image here, these are some of our second year students now actually. Loved my day at uni today. Here's a photo from the class that I took. So you might pop that on one of your social feeds or on one of your blog posts, or again a journal or something that you're keeping to kind of document your studies with us. But actually find out that the image is not your own. Okay, so the first image that I showed you is actually Emily's image. So this is Emily, your tutor. This was one of her images that I took from her Instagram page for her Kids Wear business. And this is how it should be referenced. So instead of trying to mislead the reader into thinking that this is a print that maybe you designed or maybe you've used to inform some of your trends, for example, it's really important that although it's okay to use that image, you would have to reference it like this to give full credit to Emily as the author for this particular image. We're going to look at how you actually format this in a moment, so don't worry about that. And the same with this. This image is actually an image that belongs to the course. So this is an image from the course Instagram page. And again, really important. So, you might be one of the students in this photograph, or you might be, sitting on the table next to them, but you didn't take that image. So that image doesn't belong to you. That belongs to the person who took that, which in this case was for the course Instagram page. So it needs to be referenced as so. It's not saying you can't use the image. You can use the image if you reference it and give credit to the person who it belongs to. So the Harvard method of referencing is what we're going to go through now. So as I said at the beginning, sometimes it's called a referencing list. We tend to call it a bibliography on the course. But if you've covered referencing before, you may have been taught it as a referencing list. In essence, they are both exactly the same thing. Really importantly, in red at the bottom here, that the referencing list, the bibliography, it must be in alphabetical order by the author's surname. Okay, so we're not talking about first names here. We're talking about alphabetical order by the surname, and we're going to look at how you actually would format that in a moment. And these are some of the key things that you would put on your reference for each of the sources. So if you were referencing books, so if we think about a text at the moment, a book that you perhaps have got out of the library, or a book that you have got that's informed your research, you would have to reference 5 key things for that book. And at the bottom is an example of a text book that's been referenced. And that's a kind of general format for how it be used. So you've got the alphabetical order. So you've got Woodhead is the author's surname. Their initial is J, so Jim Woodhead potentially, or Jane Woodhead. The date of publication is in brackets, as you can see. So the book was published in 2010. The title is then written after that with the place of publication if it's known. This particular example has got the pages that were relevant as well, so there potentially was only 1 or 2 chapters that the person was using, so they've put the pages on there as well. You don't have to do that if you've been referencing the book in general. You might have been looking at the book overall, so you don't need to worry necessarily about pages unless you specifically looked at a certain chapter or something. And that's an example of how you would do that. So, again, you might have, say, for example, 10, 15, 20 sources of books if you were writing a particularly academic piece, and you would reference them, you would list them in alphabetical order by surname. Web pages, so websites is something that I'm sure that most of you will be using on quite a regular basis throughout the course, so they tend to be something that can be quite informative for your projects. So websites are referenced as the example below is shown. So this was a tourism related project, obviously nothing to do with fashion, but it's still exactly the same process. So you put the name of the author or the organisation. So in this case it's an organisation. Visit Britain is the name of the company. You'd put them first. In brackets you would then put your date of the site publication, so the date that the article was written. Your title would then follow if there was a title for the particular article that you were looking at. And then really importantly, the URL or the website address. Okay, so that's what's really important, to keep a record of all of the websites that you've been referencing and going and visiting whilst you've been doing your project. And that's listed as available, and then the website address, the full website address, so not just visitbritain.org, but the whole full URL is really important. And then again, really importantly, we've got on the end here in brackets, we've got the date that you access the report. So this is an older example, this was 2012, but this is really important. So say, for example, you accessed a web page today on the 24th of October 2018, you would reference it as such, even though the article itself may have been written a couple of years ago in 2015, say, for example. You would have 2015 in the first brackets on the date of site publication, and then your date of access would be today's date. And that's really important, just so that, if you think about, you potentially might be visiting a website that's a couple of years old, maybe, and then the work might be used as an example for future students, say by one of your tutors, in a couple of years' time, say in 2020 or 2021, and that website potentially might not exist anymore. So it's really important to say, it's basically what that's saying is this information is correct as of the date that I last accessed it, which was on this date. So you're obviously not then responsible if that website gets taken down or if the information on the website is edited or changed in any particular way, because you accessed it prior to that point. Pinterest is a really important one, because I'm sure a lot of you will be looking at things like Pinterest for your visual inspiration or for any mood boards that you might be putting together. So when you find an image on Pinterest, it's not correct academic practice to reference a source as pinterest.co.uk. Obviously you found the website, you found the image on Pinterest, but Pinterest is not the original source of that image. So what you need to do, and what's really important to remember, is that if you do find images on Pinterest, which is absolutely fine, you must click onto the image to find the actual source that it was pinned from. So literally clicking on the image as it enlarges, then clicking on it again to find the original source. So this is an example. So this was an image that was found on Pinterest. The reference would not be Pinterest and then the really long pin number, okay? Because although that is the source where this particular screen grab was taken from, that's not where the actual image itself is originally from. So I would click on that image, so the image itself, and that would take us through to the actual site. So in this case, it was actually a blog that this image came from. So, and the author was somebody with a surname of Stewart, first name S. So again, you would reference it basically as a website. So as we looked at with the web pages and the websites just now, that is basically what you would do for images as well. So this is an example of an image that was found on Pinterest. Although I found it on Pinterest, it's really important that I would reference that as the original source, which is in this case a blog, sashastewart.net/blog. Okay, so clicking through on images on Pinterest is something that you are required to do. Moving on to short referencing. So this is now not thinking about your end bibliography. This is now thinking about referencing within the actual main body of text. So when you're referencing in text, we're referring to, if you're making any direct quotes, then you must reference them. So if you're copying quotes from a secondary source, for example, and putting them into your work as some evidence or some research, then that needs to be referenced. So an example here, we've got a couple of examples that both refer to the previous examples of the long references I was just talking about. So this would be an example of how to do the short reference. So basically, if you copy a quote from a secondary source, for example, say we'll use the Visit Britain as an example. We've copied a quote off of their website. We've copied it exactly, so we've copied it word for word into our report as part of our research. We would have to put that into single quotation marks as the text, which is not in our words. And then we would have simply round brackets afterwards with Visit Britain, 2012, which is the date of publication. What these are doing is, if you think about your short referencing as almost anchors, so your long referencing list is the full referencing list, the bibliography at the back. These are anchoring those references, okay? So if you think about you're potentially doing quite a long piece of writing or a long shop report or something like that, you would need to potentially have quite a few different references. And if you didn't anchor the actual quotes within your text, the bibliography at the back would be quite difficult to follow and to navigate. So these are referencing direct quotes within the text, okay? So these are some sites that do exist, because I know a couple of you have come to me and said we found some sort of websites that can help us with our referencing. Are we allowed to use them? We're not going to say that they don't exist, because obviously they do. There's 3 examples of quite commonly used ones here. But we do advise, please only use these with caution, okay? Ideally, what we would like you to do is to reference by yourself, okay? And to be able to build the confidence to reference by yourself and not to have to rely on these tools. They do sometimes have some flaws, so they're not always free from error, and they can sometimes format them slightly differently to how we would teach you to how to do them, because there are so many different variations of how to reference and even how to Harvard reference. So generally, advice would be to not use them, not to have to rely on them. Try and do it for yourself, particularly if you're starting off in first year. Really try and get your head around how to use them. By the time you get into second year and third year, it will just come absolutely naturally to you anyway. You won't even be thinking about it. But they do exist, but if you are using them, please just use them with caution and don't just rely on them completely. You will need to check them and double check them before you submit your work. There is some really useful advice on the Ravensbourne website. So this is ravensbourneharvardreferencing.org.uk. There's lots and lots of examples of different sources that you might be looking at referencing, with some examples of how you would do that, including how to reference any primary research. So this is something that we would advise you look at. So please do have a look on this website. There's loads of information on there. As I said, your tutors are able to answer questions on this as well. The library team are fantastic with referencing as well, so if you had any specific questions, then do ask your tutors or the library team at Ravensbourne. I do actually have some little leaflets that the library gave me as well, so I'll be handing those out to you next week or whenever I see you in class, and that's got lots of information in it as well. So there is lots of support just from the sort of Ravensbourne side of things in terms of how to reference that you can take advantage of. And then finally, to just sort of think about image referencing. We've touched on Pinterest, so we've touched on how you would reference that. But referencing is not just for text, so you do need to reference your images as well. So any images that are not your own, you must credit the author of the image. That can be anything from a screenshot to a photograph, to a diagram or an illustration. And this is copyright. Okay, so again, you'll hear people talk about copyright of images and copyright law. And it's really important that you obviously get your head around this before you then sort of launch out into the industry, to make sure you're being really professional with how you reference your images. So, for example, we've got here, if you take your work to an interview, you may encounter the person who actually created that image and you cannot pass it off as your own. Now, that sounds like quite a high-flying comment, but potentially, the fashion industry is a small industry, and, we do see the same images coming round and round again. And you don't want to find yourself in a position that you graduate and you go out and work for a big company and actually find that the person or the company was actually the original owner of that image, and you've not referenced it correctly, because people will rightly so become quite upset about that and not very happy if that is the case. So the easiest way to do your image referencing is to take a snapshot of your finished page and number each of the images. So this is, if you think about your trend forecasting work, you've got these really beautiful trend forecasting pages, potentially spread across double pages or however you're presenting them, primarily visual. What we don't want you to have to do is to sort of ruin your layout by then putting all the references of the images on there, for obvious sort of aesthetical reasons. So the easiest way to do your image referencing is to take a snapshot of your final page, and then to put that at the back of your work. I'm going to show you an example in a moment, and to label the images and to do the referencing at the back, okay? Because then that means that your actual visual creative work is aesthetically not kind of ruined by lots of referencing on there, but you are still following academic conventions, but you're just popping that at the back of your work, okay? As I said at the beginning, if you are the owner of the image, so if you've taken a photograph, for example, then you would reference that as author's own, okay? So you wouldn't write my own picture or Emma's image, you would write author's own, okay? And that just obviously means that you are the person who owns that particular image. So here's a lovely photo of 2 of the colleagues within the team, taken by Gabby, as you can tell. So this image belongs to Gabby. So if this was in Gabby's project, Gabby would reference that as author's own. She wouldn't need to reference it as, anything like, this is a photo that Gabby Shiner Hill took, or blah, blah, blah. She'd simply just put author's own, 2018, and that would reference that image as her own. So this is an example of how I was talking about snapshotting your pages. So they're a little bit pixelated, unfortunately, but you can kind of get the idea. You've got your screenshot of the page, and then you've got the numbers on top referring to the images on those pages. And then the numbered sources are next to that particular page. So that's just a way, if you put the references with the images, as I said, it's going to make it look quite messy if they're particularly visual pages. So you don't need to worry about that. Take a screenshot, pop it at the back, and have your image referencing looking something like this at the back of your report. So again, I was talking about some study support that's available at Ravensbourne. So these are study skills workshops. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with them. Again, really useful. There's a drop-in service for quick, brief queries on Mondays and Wednesdays in the study zone. And they also run sessions on tips on things like time management, reading, research, writing essays, etc. So there's lots of support outside of just the course. If the sort of study skills part of thing is worrying you in any way, do make sure that you reach out and get some support. And also, we've designed a mini test. So we're obviously not going to do this right now, but if you feel confident and want to click through onto it, then you may do so after you've watched the video. But we will be allowing some time in one of the sessions in the remaining weeks for you to actually go on. It's not a test as in, you don't fail it and we kick you off the course or anything like that. We're not that mean. But it's just to see if there's any gaps in your knowledge after going through those slides about referencing. If there's any gaps or things that are still not clear, hopefully the little quiz will help you to kind of identify those, and then, potentially it's image referencing that you haven't fully understood, and then we can recap over that. So it's really to build your knowledge and your confidence of Harvard referencing. Okay, but that's something that, as I say, if you wish to click through and do it now, then you may do. If you want to wait until we allocate time in the class, then that's absolutely fine as well. But that's everything. That's the kind of whirlwind through referencing. As I said, if you have any specific questions, we will be allocating time within the sessions. They're becoming a little bit more open now anyway. Or you can come and find us or ask us or email us, or you can go and speak to the library or the study skills team at Ravensbourne as well. But hopefully that clarifies some of your initial questions with the referencing. Okay, so thanks very much for listening.